At 14:32 hours on July 8, 1944, 6 kilometers east of Minsk, Hauptmann Klaus Zimmermann stood in the commander's hatch of his Panzer IV, turret number 7, 31, watching 3 Soviet armor columns converge through Zeiss binoculars that made distant death look close and clear. Northwest column, 8 kilometers out. 43-34 tanks, diesel smoke rising in the summer heat. Southeast column, 11 kilometers. Estimated 52 tanks, moving fast through open farmland. Eastern column, 5 kilometers and closing. 28 tanks, already within artillery range. The air smelled like diesel fumes and hot metal. Temperature 28 degrees Celsius. Sweat ran down Zimmermann's back inside his black Panzer uniform. The steel armor radiated heat like an oven. Summer on the Eastern Front meant fighting in a furnace. Behind him, spread across 2 kilometers of defensive positions along a creek line, 1,200 German soldiers prepared for encirclement, 47 tanks, 18 artillery pieces. 3 Wehrmacht units caught in the massive Soviet breakthrough that had shattered German lines across 200 kilometers in the past week. They had 90 minutes before the trap closed completely. Zimmermann lowered his binoculars. Did the math in his head. Soviet columns advancing at 4 kilometers per hour from 3 directions. Simple geometry. The corridor west, their only escape route, would close at approximately 1600 hours, 4 o'clock, 90 minutes. He'd seen this before. Stalingrad. Winter of 1942 through 43. 100,000 German soldiers encircled. 91,000 surrendered. Most died in Soviet captivity. Cherkasy Pocket, February 1944. 55,000 casualties trying to break out of encirclement. Encirclement meant death, either fast in combat or slow in prison camps. The pattern never changed. His gunner, Feldwebel, Ernst Koch, climbed up beside him. 29 years old, Bavarian, survived France and 3 years on the Eastern Front. Koch had fought beside Zimmermann since May 1940. He knew what the binoculars showed before he looked. How long? Koch asked. 90 minutes, Zimmermann said. Maybe less if they accelerate. What's command saying? Hold position, wait for relief. Koch was quiet for 5 seconds, then he said what they both knew. Relief won't reach us in 90 minutes. Zimmermann looked west. Division headquarters was 40 kilometers away. A relief column moving at maximum speed through contested territory needed minimum 5 hours to reach them. Probably longer. Maybe never. The math was simple. Brutal, certain. They would be encircled by 1600 hours, surrounded by Soviet armor. Cut off from supplies, reinforcements, escape routes. Standard outcome, surrender or annihilation. Unless someone changed the equation. The problem started 6 days earlier, when Soviet forces launched Operation Bagration, the largest offensive in military history. 2.4 million Soviet troops, 5,000 tanks, 6,000 aircraft. They hit German Army Group Center across a 400-kilometer front. German lines collapsed in 48 hours. 3 Soviet breakthrough columns penetrated deep into German rear areas. They moved fast, exploiting gaps, encircling isolated units, standard Soviet deep battle doctrine, punch through, drive deep, surround everything that couldn't retreat fast enough. Zimmermann's regiment, the 24th Panzer, had been part of the defensive line near Minsk. When the breakthrough came, they pulled back in good order, maintained unit cohesion, followed doctrine. But 2 other units got tangled in the retreat. The 352nd Infantry Regiment, moving slower on foot. The 88th Artillery Battalion, trying to save their guns instead of abandoning them for speed. By July 7th, all 3 units were trapped east of Minsk. Soviet columns had cut 2 escape routes. Only 1 corridor remained, and it was closing. 1,200 men, 47 tanks, 18 guns, all waiting for orders that made sense. At 1400 hours, Major Dietrich Wolf called a commander's meeting. Battalion headquarters was in a farmhouse with walls scarred by bullet holes. Previous fighting. Previous retreats. Wolf was 46 years old, infantry officer, veteran of the First World War. He commanded the 352nd Infantry. Captain Heinrich Steiner, 38, commanded the 88th Artillery. Zimmermann, 34, commanded 7th Company, 24th Panzer Regiment. Wolf spread maps on a wooden table. Marked Soviet positions with red pencil. Marked the closing corridor with blue. Current situation, Wolf said. Soviet forces converging from 3 directions. We hold defensive positions along this creek line. Strong terrain advantage, good fields of fire. Steiner studied the map. How long until we're surrounded? Approximately 90 minutes at current Soviet advance rates. And the relief column? Division promises units by nightfall. Zimmermann did his own math. Nightfall was 2100 hours. 9 at night. 7 hours away. The corridor would close in 90 minutes. Relief won't reach us in time, Zimmermann said. Wolf looked at him. Division has promised support. Division is 40 kilometers west. Soviet forces control the roads between here and there. A relief column needs 5 hours minimum. We have 90 minutes. Then we hold this position, Wolf said. Standard defense in depth. Make them pay for every meter. And when they surround us? Zimmermann asked. We continue fighting. Division will break through. Zimmermann looked at the map again, looked at the red marks showing Soviet columns, looked at the shrinking blue corridor. The math didn't work. We should retreat now, Zimmermann said. While the corridor is still open. Move all units through simultaneously. Abandon the heavy equipment. Save the men. Retreat without orders? Wolf's voice had an edge. That's not how Wehrmacht operates. Hauptmann. Staying here means encirclement. Division has ordered us to hold. Division doesn't understand our situation. Are you suggesting we disobey direct orders? Zimmermann met his eyes. Said what everyone in the room was thinking. I'm suggesting we keep 1,200 men alive. Silence. Captain Steiner broke it. What if we used smoke? Cover our retreat with smoke screens? Zimmermann had been thinking the same thing. Had been running calculations for the past hour. Smoke deployment could work, Zimmermann said. All tanks deploy simultaneously. Create wall 800 meters wide. Blind Soviet coordination. Move the entire formation through while they're confused. Wolf stared at him. You want to deploy all our defensive smoke stores in one action? Yes. That violates 3 separate regulations. Smoke is authorized only for specific tactical purposes. Masking river crossings. Covering defensive positions. Not retreat. It could save 1,200 lives. It could also disorient our own forces. We'd be moving blind. Formation integrity would collapse. Tanks would collide. Infantry would get separated. And you'd be court-martialed for unauthorized use of combat stores. Better court-martialed than dead, sir. Wolf's face went hard. You've been reprimanded twice already for unauthorized actions, Hauptmann. Another violation means execution. Zimmermann knew his record. October 1942. Unauthorized river crossing that saved his company from encirclement. Formal reprimand. March 1943. Improvised night attack against Soviet positions. Another reprimand. Both times, command said he violated doctrine. Both times, his company survived when others didn't. I understand the risks, sir. Do you? Because I won't authorize smoke. Deployment for retreat. We hold this position. That's final. The meeting ended. Zimmermann walked back to his tank through afternoon heat that made the air shimmer. His crew was performing maintenance, checking track tension, cleaning the 75mm gun, refilling ammunition racks. His driver, Obergefreiter Paul Schmidt, looked up from the engine compartment. 23 years old, Berlin, mechanical genius. Could keep a panzer running on bad fuel and spare parts. What did command say? Schmidt asked. Hold position. Wait for relief. Relief that won't arrive in time. That's correct. His loader, Gefreiter Hans Weber, was 20 years old. Hamburg, like Zimmermann. Weber had worked in his father's warehouse before the war. Strong, reliable, followed orders without question. His radio operator, Unteroffizier Otto Kraus, 26, from Frankfurt, had the best ears in the company, could identify tank types by engine sound from 2 kilometers away, and Koch, his gunner, the man who'd kept Zimmermann alive for 4 years. They all looked at him, waiting. Ernst, Zimmermann said to Koch, check our smoke grenades, all 9 launchers. I need exact count. Koch understood immediately. We're doing something unauthorized again. Probably. Good. I was getting bored following orders. Zimmermann climbed into his tank, pulled out his maps, spread them across the commander's seat. He needed to calculate smoke dispersion patterns, wind speed, temperature inversions, deployment timing. He'd been a chemistry teacher before the war, Hamburg Realschule, taught students about molecular behavior, gas laws, dispersion patterns, how smoke moves based on temperature and pressure and wind. That knowledge seemed useless when he enlisted in September 1939. The Wehrmacht needed soldiers, not chemistry teachers. They made him a tank officer, sent him to France in May 1940. But over 4 years of combat, Zimmermann learned something. Chemistry saved lives. Understanding how gases behaved, how smoke dispersed, how temperature affected visibility. That knowledge mattered more than any tactical manual. He'd first noticed it at Dunkirk. British forces used smoke screens during their evacuation. The smoke was poorly deployed, wrong wind conditions, too thin in places. But it worked anyway. British soldiers escaped because German forces couldn't coordinate attacks through the smoke. Smoke didn't just conceal. It paralyzed enemy coordination. 3 years on the Eastern Front taught him Soviet weaknesses. Their radio discipline was poor. They relied on visual signals, flag communications between units, flares for timing, coordination, timed movements based on observed positions. Blind them, and their coordination collapsed. Zimmermann had seen it 3 times. December 1942. Accidental smoke grenade deployment broke up a Soviet infantry assault. March 1943. Forest fire smoke disrupted Soviet ATs. Armor for 20 minutes. May 1944. Artillery smoke screen caused an entire Soviet column to halt and wait for visibility. Soviet commanders couldn't fight what they couldn't see. The idea had been forming for weeks. What if you deployed smoke not defensively, but offensively? What if you created a wall so thick, so wide, that Soviet forces lost all visual reference? What if you moved your entire formation through that wall before the enemy could react? It violated every regulation in the Wehrmacht manual. But staying here violated the regulation about keeping your men alive. Zimmermann pulled out his technical manual, found the specifications for Nebelkerze 39 smoke grenades. Each grenade burned for 80 seconds. Created smoke cloud, 30 meters, radius. Panzer IV tanks carried 3 launchers, 9 grenades total. He did the math. 47 tanks times 9 grenades equals 423 grenades. Deployed simultaneously in overlapping pattern. Coverage 800 meters width, 200 meters depth. Duration approximately 12 minutes, accounting for wind dispersion. Distance traveled in 12 minutes at maximum speed of 15 kilometers per hour. 3 kilometers. Distance through the corridor to friendly lines, 2.8 kilometers. The math worked. Barely. But 3 massive problems remained. First, it required all 47 tanks deploying simultaneously. Perfect timing. Second, maintaining formation while blind for 12 minutes. No visual reference. Third, executing the plan meant violating direct orders from Major Wolf. Court-martial offense. Possible execution. Zimmermann looked at his maps again. Looked at the Soviet positions. Looked at the closing corridor. 1,200 men depending on someone making the right decision. Command had made their decision. Hold position. Wait for relief that wouldn't arrive. Now Zimmermann had to make his. At 1500 hours, the Soviet columns were 6 kilometers out. Corridor closing. 60 minutes remaining. Zimmermann made his choice. He would calculate the smoke deployment, plan the unauthorized retreat, risk court-martial, risk execution. Risk everything to save 1,200 men that Division Command had already written off as acceptable losses. Koch climbed back into the turret. All smoke grenades accounted for. 9 launchers, full load. Good. You're going to do this, aren't you? Deploy smoke without authorization? Yes. The other tank commanders won't follow. Wolf refused. Then I convince them directly. And if they still refuse? Zimmermann looked at his gunner. 4 years of trust, 4 years of surviving together. Then I deploy with whoever will follow, and hope the others see it working and join us. Koch nodded slowly. How many times have your unauthorized plans saved this company? 6 times. 7 if this works. 7 if this works. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed down on 1,200 men waiting to be encircled, waiting for orders that made sense, waiting for someone to change the equation. Zimmermann checked his stopwatch. 57 minutes until the corridor closed. Time to see if a chemistry teacher's knowledge of smoke dispersion could beat Soviet armor and Wehrmacht regulations. Time to find out if matches and math could save 1,200 lives. Klaus Zimmermann learned about smoke dispersion in Hamburg, 1935, teaching chemistry to 16-year-old students who didn't understand why gas behavior mattered. His classroom overlooked the Elbe River and the industrial district beyond. Factory smokestacks pumped grey clouds into the sky every morning. One student, a boy named Joseph, asked the question that would save 1,200 lives 9 years later. Herr Zimmermann, why does smoke from the factory stack go east in the morning but west in the evening? Zimmermann drew diagrams on the blackboard. Temperature inversions. Air density. Pressure differentials. Cool morning air kept smoke low, pushed it east by prevailing winds. Warm evening air lifted smoke higher, where different wind patterns carried it west. The students wrote it down. Most forgot it after the exam. Zimmermann never forgot. When he joined the Wehrmacht in September 1939, nobody cared about his chemistry background. They needed tank officers. They sent him to Panzer School for 6 weeks. Taught him gunnery, tactics, radio procedure, nothing about gas dispersion. France, May 1940, his first combat. His Panzer III was part of the drive to the Channel coast. They reached the English Channel in 2 weeks. The British Army trapped at Dunkirk. Zimmermann watched the evacuation from 5 kilometers away. British forces used smoke screens to cover their retreat to the beaches. The smoke was amateur work. Wrong deployment pattern. Wind carried it away too fast in some places, too thick in others. But it worked. German armor couldn't coordinate attacks through the inconsistent smoke. By the time visibility cleared, British soldiers were already boarding ships. 338,000 men evacuated because smoke broke German visual coordination. Zimmermann filed that information away. Smoke doesn't just conceal, it disrupts. Eastern Front, June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Everything changed. France had been a 6-week campaign. Russia became a 3-year nightmare. Zimmermann learned Soviet tactics through survival. Their radio discipline was terrible. They relied on visual signals between units, flag communications, colored flares for timing, coordinated advances based on observed positions of adjacent columns. Their system worked in clear conditions, failed completely in smoke, fog, or darkness. December 1942. Near Stalingrad. A Soviet rifle company attacked Zimmermann's position at dawn. His loader, a boy named Werner, dropped a smoke grenade while loading it into Bird, the launcher. Accident. The grenade rolled under the tank, ignited, pumped white smoke across 50 meters. The Soviet attack fell apart immediately. Infantry couldn't see their squad leaders. Squad leaders couldn't see their company commander. The company commander couldn't see the neighboring units that were supposed to attack simultaneously. The assault dissolved into confused groups stumbling through smoke. Zimmermann's company cut them down. 37 Soviet soldiers killed. 0 German casualties. All because of one accidentally dropped smoke grenade. Zimmermann started paying attention to smoke after that. March 1943. Forest fire near Kursk. Lightning strike ignited dry timber. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. A Soviet armor column approaching from the east stopped completely. Waited 40 minutes for smoke to clear before resuming advance. Zimmermann understood. Soviet commanders couldn't coordinate without seeing their objectives. Smoke paralyzed them, more effectively than artillery. May 1944. German artillery laid smoke screen to cover a withdrawal. 8 Soviet tanks pursuing them halted at the smoke line, waited for it to disperse. Gave German forces 20 minutes head start. 3 separate incidents. Same pattern. Smoke broke Soviet coordination. Now, July 8, 1944, 14:47 hours. Zimmermann sat inside his Panzer IV with maps, compass, and stopwatch, calculating whether his chemistry knowledge could save 1,200 men. Current conditions. Temperature 28 Celsius. Humidity 65%. Wind speed 8 km per hour from the west. Terrain: open fields, minimal tree cover, slight elevation advantage on the defensive line. He pulled out his technical manual, found the specifications for Nebelkerze 39 smoke grenades. Standard issue for all German armor. Burn time: 80 seconds per grenade. Coverage: 30 meters radius per grenade. Deployment: 3 launchers per Panzer IV. 9 grenades total. His company had 15 Panzer IVs. The other units added another 32. Total: 47 tanks. Zimmermann did the calculation. 47 tanks times 9 grenades equals 423 grenades, deployed simultaneously in overlapping pattern to eliminate gaps. Coverage: 800 meters width times 200 meters depth. Duration: 12 minutes, accounting for wind dispersion, at 8 km per hour. Distance traveled at maximum speed of 15 km per hour for 12 minutes, 3 km. Distance through corridor to friendly lines, 2.8 km. The margin worked. Barely. But the plan required 3 things that violated Wehrmacht regulations. First, all 47 tanks deploying smoke simultaneously, without division authorization. Smoke stores were controlled materials. Unauthorized use meant court-martial. Second, moving entire formations through self-generated smoke. Doctrine considered this suicidally dangerous. Tanks would lose formation integrity, collisions, separated units, chaos. Third, ignoring direct orders from Major Wolf to hold position. Any one of these violations meant court-martial. All 3 together meant execution. Zimmermann considered alternatives. Standard retreat through the corridor without smoke. Soviet forces had clear fields of fire. 3 kilometers under direct observation. Estimated casualties: 60%. 720 men dead or wounded. Hold position as ordered. Encirclement within 90 minutes. Historical data from Stalingrad and Cherkasy showed 75% casualties in encircled units. 900 men dead or captured. Breakout without smokescreen. Soviet 34s had visual advantage, could coordinate overlapping fields of fire. Estimated casualties: 75%. 900 men. Smokescreen retreat. Blind Soviet coordination. 12 minutes of covered movement. Estimated casualties: 40%. 480 men. Every option meant casualties, but one option meant significantly fewer dead. Zimmermann heard boots on tank armor. His gunner, Feldwebel Ernst Koch, climbed into the turret. Koch was 29 years old. Bavaria. Joined Wehrmacht 1938. France, Poland, Russia. 4 years fighting beside Zimmermann. Survived 7 major engagements, 23 skirmishes. Trust built over 4 years of not dying. You're planning something unauthorized again, Koch said. I can tell by the look on your face. Zimmerman showed him the calculations. The smoke coverage pattern. The timing sequence. The estimated casualties. Koch studied the numbers for 30 seconds. 12 minutes blind, Koch said. We'll lose formation integrity. Tanks will drift off course. We'll use compass bearings, engine sound to maintain spacing. I'll calculate individual routes for each tank based on their starting positions. The other commanders won't authorize it. Wolf already refused. I know. So you're planning to do it anyway? Yes. Koch looked at the maps again. Looked at the Soviet positions marked in red. Looked at the shrinking corridor marked in blue. How many times have your unauthorized plans saved this company? Koch asked. 6 times. 7 if this works. The crew will follow you. What do you need? Zimmerman needed to convince other tank commanders. Needed at least 30 tanks for adequate smoke coverage. 15 from his own company would participate automatically. His crews trusted him. But the other 32 tanks belonged to other officers, other companies, different commanders who'd never violated orders. He called his platoon leaders at 1500 hours, meeting behind a supply truck where Major Wolf couldn't see them. Lieutenant Rolf Becker commanded 2nd Platoon. 5 Panzer IVs. 26 years old. Berlin. Veteran of France and 2 years on the Eastern Front. Smart, cautious, followed doctrine. Oberleutnant Franz Weber commanded 3rd Platoon. 4 Panzer IVs. 31 years old. Munich. Aggressive. 3 years. Russia. Liked unconventional tactics but respected regulations. Zimmerman commanded 1st Platoon. 6 Panzer IVs. His company total, 15 tanks. He spread his maps on the truck tailgate. Showed them the calculations, the smoke coverage pattern, the escape timeline, the casualty estimates. Becker stared at the numbers. Major Wolf will have you shot for this. Major Wolf's plan gets 900 men encircled. His plan follows orders. His plan follows orders that don't account for reality. Weber traced the corridor on the map. What about the other tanks, the Panzer IIIs, the infantry units? I need to convince their commanders. They won't listen, Becker said. Wolf already refused. The other officers follow his lead. Then I convince their crews directly. That's insubordination. Bypassing chain of command. They'll execute you even if the plan works. Zimmerman looked at both officers. I'm already facing court-martial for previous violations. Adding another doesn't change my situation. But it might save 1,200 lives. Silence. Weber spoke first. I'm in. My platoon will deploy smoke on your signal. Becker took longer. 15 seconds studying the maps. Finally. My gunners say you understand combat better than command does. I trust my gunners. I'm in. 15 tanks committed, 32 remaining. At 15 hours, Zimmerman moved between tank positions, talked to individual commanders, showed them the math, explained Soviet coordination weakness, demonstrated smoke coverage calculations, offered them a choice, unauthorized retreat or certain encirclement. Most were parked along the creek line. Defensive positions facing east. Crews performing maintenance, cleaning weapons, waiting for Soviet columns to arrive. First tank, Panzer IV No. 703, Commander. Unteroffizier Stefan Richter, 24 years old, Frankfurt. Zimmerman climbed onto the hull. Richter was checking the main gun elevation mechanism. Unteroffizier, I need 2 minutes of your time. Richter looked up. Hauptmann. Zimmerman showed him the maps. Explained the smokescreen plan. Showed him casualty estimates. Richter listened. Then said, Major Wolf ordered us to hold position. Major Wolf's order will get us encircled. But it's an order, sir. I follow orders. Even orders that guarantee your death? Especially those orders. That's what soldiers do. Zimmerman moved to the next tank. Same conversation. Same result. Some commanders refused immediately. Too risky. too unauthorized, too likely to end in court-martial. But some listened. Panzer IV, No. 712. Commander: Feldwebel Klaus Dietrich, 32 years old, Hamburg. He'd heard about Zimmermann's previous unauthorized actions. October 1942. Unauthorized river crossing. March 1943. Improvised night attack. Both times, Zimmermann's company survived when others didn't. Your plans worked before, Dietrich said. I'm in. Panzer IV, No. 717. Commander: Lieutenant Otto Schneider, 28 years old, Dresden. Lost his previous company in an encirclement near Smolensk. Spent 3 months in Soviet captivity before escaping. Recaptured, escaped again. Made it back to German lines in January 1944. I was encircled once, Schneider said. Never again. I'll deploy smoke on your signal. Tank by tank. Commander by commander. 15-20 hours, 15-30, 15-45. Some refused, some believed, some were undecided. By 15-45 hours, Zimmermann had commitments from 28 tanks, 19 refused or undecided. Not enough. He needed all 47 for complete smoke coverage. 28 tanks would create 600 meters of smoke wall. Better than nothing. But gaps in the coverage meant Soviet forces could maintain partial visual coordination. The infantry commanders were worse. Major Wolf commanded the 352 Infantry Regiment. He'd already refused to authorize the smoke retreat. His 800 infantry soldiers would stay in position, follow orders, wait for encirclement. Captain Steiner commanded the 88th Artillery Battalion. 18 guns, 300 personnel. Steiner was sympathetic, but unwilling to violate orders. I understand your reasoning, Hauptmann, Steiner said. But I can't authorize my battalion to follow unauthorized retreat. If you're wrong, we all die. If you're right, I'm still court-martialed. You'll be court-martialed alive instead of dead. That's not as compelling as you think. 400 infantry soldiers would follow the tanks if they saw the smoke working. Maybe. But they wouldn't commit in advance. Zimmermann returned to his tank at 15:52 hours. 28 tanks committed, 19 uncommitted, 800 infantry refusing to participate. His radio operator, Kraus, had news. Hauptmann, scout report just came in. Soviet columns accelerated their advance. Zimmermann grabbed the report. Read it twice. Soviet northwest column, now 5 kilometers out, not 8. Southeast column, 7 kilometers, not 11. They'd increased speed from 4 kilometers per hour to 6. New calculation. Corridor would close in 60 minutes, not 90. 16:04 hours. 64 minutes from now. Not enough time for careful planning. Not enough time to convince the remaining 19 tanks. Major Wolf called a radio conference at 1600 hours. All units. This is battalion command. Soviet forces accelerating. Prepare for defensive engagement. Division promises relief column by nightfall. Hold current positions. Defend in depth. That is all. Relief by nightfall. 2100 hours. 5 hours away. The corridor would close in 60 minutes. Zimmermann keyed his radio. Command. This is 731. Relief won't arrive before encirclement. Request authorization for immediate withdrawal. Wolf's response was immediate. 731. Negative. Hold your position. That's a direct order. Sir, Soviet columns will close the corridor in 60 minutes. Then we defend for 60 minutes. Relief is en route. Relief is 5 hours out, sir. Hauptmann Zimmermann. You will hold your position. Any unauthorized movement will result in immediate court-martial. Do you understand? Zimmermann looked at his maps. At the Soviet positions. At the closing corridor. At the 28 tanks willing to follow him. At the 19 tanks following orders. At the 1,200 men about to be encircled. He understood. He understood that following orders meant death. He understood that violating orders meant court-martial. He understood that his chemistry knowledge could save lives if anyone would listen. He understood that command had already written off 1,200 men as acceptable losses. Koch watched him from the gunner's position. "What are you going to do?" Zimmerman checked his watch. 16:02 hours. 62 minutes until encirclement. He made his decision. We execute the smoke screen with 28 tanks. Create partial coverage. Hope the others follow when they see it working. Move as many personnel as possible through the corridor before it closes. And if Wolf court-martials you, then I'm court-martialed alive instead of encircled dead. Zimmerman called his committed tank commanders on tactical frequency. 28 confirmations. All participating units switch to frequency 42.6. Acknowledge. 28 responses. They were now on unauthorized frequency. First violation. Deploy smoke on my mark. Full load. 9 grenades. Overlapping pattern as briefed. Compass bearing 270 degrees. 15 kilometers per hour. 12 minutes. Execute on mark. His watch showed 16:03 hours. 61 minutes until corridor closed. He gave his crew their orders. Schmidt, his driver. Maintain compass bearing 270 degrees exact. Speed 15 kilometers per hour by engine RPM. Ignore all visual reference. Koch, his gunner. Call out time intervals. Every minute. I need to know exactly where we are in the sequence. Weber, his loader. Deploy smoke grenades on my command, all 9 launchers. Sequential firing. 3 seconds between each salvo. Kraus, his radio operator. Monitor Soviet frequencies. I need to know if they adapt faster than expected. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on 1,200 men who didn't know 28 tank commanders were about to violate orders to save them. Zimmerman climbed into his commander's position, pulled the hatch closed. The interior of the Panzer IV smelled like gun oil and sweat and hot metal. He checked his compass. 270 degrees. Due west. Straight through, the corridor to German lines 2.8 kilometers away. He checked his stopwatch. Ready to mark 12 minutes exactly. He checked his calculations one final time. Wind speed 8 kilometers per hour. Temperature 28 Celsius. Smoke dispersion rate based on Nebelkerze 39 specifications. Coverage 600 meters width with 28 tanks. Not perfect, but enough to blind Soviet coordination for 12 minutes. Enough to save whoever would follow. Major Wolf's voice crackled over the main radio frequency. All units, Soviet forces at 4 kilometers. Prepare defensive positions. Stand by for engagement. 4 kilometers. 24 minutes until they arrived. 37 minutes until the corridor closed behind them. Zimmerman switched to his unauthorized frequency. 28 tanks listening. All units, deploy smoke on my mark in 3, 2, 1. He keyed the radio. Mark. Execute. 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 At 16:06 hours, 28, Panzer IV tanks fired 252 smoke grenades simultaneously across a 600-meter front line 6 kilometers east of Minsk. The sound was like tearing fabric, hissing, popping. 252 Nebelkerze 39 grenades igniting within 12 seconds of each other. White-grey smoke erupted from the ground. Thick chemical clouds that rose 15 meters into the summer air and spread laterally like spilled milk on a table. Zimmerman watched through his vision port as the world disappeared. 5 seconds. Smoke rose past his tank's turret height. 10 seconds. Visibility dropped to 20 meters. 15 seconds. He couldn't see the tank 30 meters to his left. 20 seconds. Complete whiteout. Visibility less than 5 meters. The smoke smelled like phosphorus and burning chemicals. It filled his nostrils even inside the closed tank. His eyes watered. The air tasted metallic. All units, commence movement, Zimmerman said into his radio. Compass, bearing 270 degrees. Speed 15 kilometers per hour. Maintain formation by engine sound. Execute now. His driver, Schmidt, couldn't see anything through his vision port, just white smoke pressed against the glass like fog. Compass shows 270 degrees. Herr Hauptmann, Schmidt said. His voice was steady, professional. Beginning movement. The Panzer IV lurched forward. Engine roaring. Tracks clattering over dirt and grass. Moving blind into smoke so thick it looked solid. Zimmermann couldn't see the ground, couldn't see other tanks, couldn't see the sun. Just white smoke in every direction. Navigation depended entirely on instruments now. Compass bearing. Engine RPM for speed calculation. Stopwatch for distance travelled. And sound. The diesel engine of the Panzer IV ahead made a distinctive rumble at 15 kilometers per hour. Deep. Rhythmic. Zimmermann could hear it through the smoke even though he couldn't see the tank. Behind him, another engine sound. Tank 703. Commanded by Feldwebel Dietrich. Keeping proper spacing by listening to Zimmermann's engine. 28 tanks moving in staggered column through white blindness. Each tank following the one ahead by sound alone. Koch called out the first time mark. 1 minute. 1 minute down. 11 remaining. Distance travelled. 250 meters. Inside the tank, the only sounds were engine roar, track clatter, and breathing. Weber sat ready at the loader's position, even though they weren't fighting. Krauss monitored radio frequencies. Schmidt kept both hands on the steering levers, making micro-adjustments to maintain compass bearing. The compass needle wavered. 268 degrees. 272. Schmidt corrected. Back to 270 exactly. Outside, the smoke wall stretched 800 meters wide and 200 meters deep. 12 minutes of chemical fog obscuring 1,200 men and 28 tanks moving west toward a corridor that would close in. 58 minutes. Major Wolf's voice exploded over the main radio frequency. Zimmermann, what have you done? I ordered you to hold position. Zimmermann switched frequencies. Ignored him, focused on navigation. 2 minutes, Koch said. 2 minutes. 500 meters travelled, 2.3 kilometers remaining. The smoke was working exactly as Zimmermann calculated. Wind speed 8 kilometers per hour from the west pushed the smoke eastward, maintaining the wall between retreating German forces and advancing Soviet columns. But on the Soviet side, confusion was spreading. Commander of the Soviet Northwest 34 Column was Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Volkov, 31 years old, veteran of Stalingrad and Kursk. He'd destroyed 17 German tanks in 2 years of combat. At 16:06 hours, Volkov watched a massive white wall erupt across the German defensive line. His first thought, chemical attack, gas. His second thought, defensive smoke screen to mask, anti-tank positions. His third thought, something was wrong. This wasn't defensive smoke. Too much, too wide, too coordinated. He grabbed his radio. All units, halt advance. Heavy smoke deployment at Sector 7. Enemy intentions unclear. Soviet doctrine said smoke meant either defensive preparation or imminent counterattack. Either way, advancing blind into smoke was tactically stupid. You couldn't see anti-tank guns, couldn't coordinate with adjacent units, couldn't maintain formation integrity. Volkov's column slowed from 6 kilometers per hour to 2, then stopped completely at the smoke wall's edge. Request artillery barrage before advancing. Volkov radioed to his regimental commander. Negative. Artillery is engaging targets in Sector 4. You have infantry support. Advance through smoke with infantry screen. Volkov looked at the white wall. It was 200 meters deep. Couldn't see through it at all. Advancing through that, with infantry screen, would take 20 minutes. Maybe 30. He ordered halt position. Wait for smoke to clear. Then advance. The southeast column made the same decision. So did the eastern column. All 3 Soviet forces stopped at the smoke perimeter, waited for visibility. Waited to understand what the Germans were doing. This delay was critical. It bought the retreating Germans 8 extra minutes before Soviet forces would realize the defensive line was abandoned. Inside Zimmermann's tank, 3 minutes had passed. 3 minutes, Koch said. 750 meters. Visibility remained 0. Just white smoke pressing against every vision port. The world reduced to engine sound and compass bearings. Then the first problem emerged. Tank 717, commanded by Lieutenant Schneider, called over the radio, his voice tight with stress. "Command, this is 717. I've lost compass bearing. Can't determine direction. Request guidance." Schneider's tank had veered 15 degrees south. He was drifting away, from the column, heading into empty smoke. Zimmermann keyed his radio. 717, stop all movement. Listen for engine sounds. The column is to your north. Turn right until you hear engines, then match their bearing. "I can't hear anything, sir." The smoke muffles sound. Zimmermann thought fast. "Kraus, give them a radio bearing." Kraus, his radio operator, had the best ears in the company. He could triangulate positions by radio signal strength. 17. Transmit continuous signal for 10 seconds, Kraus said. Static hiss. Then Kraus. "You're 40 meters south of the column. Turn right 20 degrees. Accelerate to match convoy speed. Turning right 20 degrees. 30 seconds later, Schneider's voice. "I hear engines. Rejoining formation. Crisis. Resolved." But it demonstrated the danger. One navigation error meant separation. Separation meant getting lost in smoke. Getting lost meant missing the corridor entirely. 4 minutes, Koch said. 4 minutes. 1 kilometer traveled. 1.8 remaining. The tank shuddered. Schmidt fought the steering levers. "Rough terrain, Herr Hauptmann. Can't see obstacles." They'd hit a drainage ditch. Not deep enough to stop them, but enough to jar the entire crew. Weber hit his head on the turret interior. Didn't complain, just steadied himself and stayed ready. Behind them, the uncommitted tanks and infantry units were making decisions. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, commander of Tank 703, who'd initially refused to participate, watched the smoke wall from his defensive position, watched it spread, watched 28 tanks disappear into white fog. He grabbed his radio, called his platoon leader. "Sir, Zimmermann just deployed unauthorized smokescreen. He's retreating through the corridor." His platoon leader. "I know. He's violating orders. But sir, his plan might work. The Soviets have stopped advancing. They're waiting for smoke to clear." "We have orders to hold position." Richter looked at the Soviet columns. 4 kilometers out. Looked at the smoke wall. Looked at the corridor to the west. Still open but closing. He made his choice. "I'm following Zimmermann, sir. Court-martial me if you want, but I'm not staying here to be encircled." He ordered his crew. "Deploy all smoke grenades. Follow the sound of the column. Maximum speed." Tank 703 fired 9 smoke grenades and drove into the white wall. 11 other uncommitted tanks made the same decision. Saw the smoke working. Saw the Soviets halted. Saw a chance at survival. They fired their smoke grenades, added 108 more grenades to the wall. The coverage expanded from 600 meters to nearly 800 meters. Almost complete coverage as Zimmermann originally calculated. 39 tanks now moving through smoke instead of 28. Behind them, infantry soldiers watched tanks disappearing. Some officers ordered their men to hold position. Others recognized opportunity. "Follow the tanks," a company commander shouted. "Stay close to the engine sounds." Approximately 400 infantry soldiers abandoned their defensive positions, ran into the smoke, followed tank engine sounds west toward the corridor. Major Wolf watched his defensive line disintegrate, watched 3/4 of his force disappear into unauthorized retreat. He had a choice. Stay with the 8 tanks and 450 soldiers who'd followed his orders, or follow the unauthorized retreat. He chose to stay, followed orders, maintained discipline. 8 tanks, 450 men, waiting for Soviet encirclement because regulations mattered more than survival. Inside the smoke, Zimmermann's column reached the halfway point. 6 minutes, Koch said. 6 minutes. 1.5 kilometers traveled. 1.3 remaining. Then Soviet forces began probing the smoke. At 16:12 hours, Volkov's 34 column advanced slowly into the White Wall. Infantry screen ahead, tanks following at 2 kilometers per hour. They couldn't see anything, just white chemical fog. But they fired anyway. Probing fire, hoping to hit whatever was hiding in the smoke. Machine gun tracers cut through white fog. Random patterns. No targets, just shooting at where they thought German positions should be. Most rounds hit empty ground, some found metal. Tank 723, commanded by Unteroffizier Paul Bauer, took a 76mm round to the right track. The shell hit at a bad angle, penetrated track linkage, destroyed the drive sprocket. The tank ground to a halt. Track destroyed. Bauer called over radio. Can't continue. Crew status? Zimmermann asked. All alive, no injuries, but tank is immobile. Bail out, follow on foot, stay in the smoke. Follow engine sounds west. 5 crewmen abandoned tank 723, ran through smoke following the sound of retreating armor. They couldn't see 3 meters ahead, stumbled over, rough ground. Stayed together by holding onto each other's equipment. More Soviet probing fire. 76mm shells whistling through smoke. Machine gun bursts. Random artillery shells landing in the corridor. Most missed. Some didn't. 3 infantry soldiers hit by machine gun fire. 2 killed instantly. 1 wounded in the leg. His squad mates carried him, moving through smoke by sound alone. 7 minutes, Koch said. 7 minutes. 1.75 kilometers traveled. 1.05 kilometers remaining. The smoke was starting to thin at the rear edge. Wind dispersion, grenades burning out. The wall was collapsing from east to west, as Zimmermann predicted. But the thinning smoke revealed something to Soviet forces. Volkov's infantry screen emerged from the eastern edge of the smoke wall. Found abandoned German defensive positions. Empty foxholes. Abandoned equipment. No defenders. Volkov understood immediately. They're retreating. The smoke is covering. Retreat, not counterattack. He grabbed his radio. All units, maximum speed. Enemy retreating through smoke. Catch them before they reach the corridor. The Soviet northwest column accelerated. From 2 kilometers per hour to 8. The southeast column did the same. Racing to close the corridor before German forces could escape. The trap was closing faster now. Zimmermann's column had 5 minutes remaining in the smoke. The corridor would close in 43 minutes. They needed to cover 1.05 kilometers in 5 minutes. Then get through the corridor before Soviet pincers met. The math was getting tight. 8 minutes, Koch said. 8 minutes. 2 kilometers traveled. 0.8 kilometers remaining. The smoke ahead was thinning. Zimmermann could see 15 meters now. 20. 30. Visibility returning. The chemical wall was collapsing as predicted. 9 minutes. 2.25 kilometers. 0.55 remaining. Zimmermann could see other tanks now, shadows in thinning smoke. Tank 707 to his left. Tank 712 to his right. Formation integrity maintained despite 12 minutes of blind navigation. Behind him, 38 other tanks, 400 infantry soldiers, all moving west through dissipating smoke. Ahead, maybe 500 meters, he could see clear air. The western edge of the smoke wall. Beyond that, open terrain and the corridor to German lines. 10 minutes. 2.5 kilometers traveled, 0.3 remaining. The smoke was thin enough now that Soviet forces could see shapes moving through it. Tank silhouettes, infantry groups. Volkov's column opened fire. 76mm tank rounds, machine guns. Artillery. Shells whistled through the thinning smoke. Impacted around the retreating German column. Tank 740, one hit in the rear armor. 76mm round penetrated engine compartment. The engine exploded. Fire erupted from the hull. 741 is burning, someone shouted over radio. Crew status. Bailing out. All 5 alive. The crew abandoned the burning tank, ran forward through smoke. 5 more soldiers on foot. Soviet fire intensified. They could see targets now. Machine gun tracers carved through the dissipating smoke wall. 4 more infantry casualties, 3 wounded. 1 killed. 11 minutes, Koch said. 11 minutes. 2.75 kilometers. 0.05 remaining. Zimmermann's tank broke through the western edge of the smoke wall. Clear air. Visibility returned. He could see German defensive lines 800 meters ahead. Friendly territory. Safety. Behind him, 38 tanks emerged from smoke like ghosts materializing from fog. 38 Panzer IVs with smoke stains on their armor and crews who'd just navigated 12 minutes of complete blindness. 400 infantry soldiers stumbled out of the smoke, exhausted, disoriented. But alive. 12 minutes, Koch said. We're through. Zimmermann checked. His position. The corridor was still open. 3 kilometers wide. Soviet columns were closing from north and south, but they hadn't met yet. All units, maximum speed to friendly lines. Don't stop, don't engage, just run. 39 tanks accelerated to 25 kilometers per hour, racing through the corridor. Infantry ran behind them, using tanks as cover from Soviet fire. Soviet forces realized what happened, realized the Germans had escaped through smokescreen. Volkov's column tried to catch them but couldn't close the distance fast enough. At 16:21 hours, the smoke wall completely dissipated. Wind carried away the last wisps of white chemical fog. Soviet forces saw abandoned German defensive positions, saw the retreating column already 500 meters away and accelerating. Volkov ordered pursuit. But his column needed 3 minutes to reorganize after the confusion. By then, German forces were too far ahead. At 16:35 hours, Zimmermann's column crossed into German defensive lines. 39 tanks, 750 personnel on foot, all alive, all free of encirclement. Behind them, the Soviet pincers met. The corridor closed at 16:48 hours. Major Wolf and his 8 tanks, 450 soldiers who'd stayed behind, were now surrounded, cut off. Trapped in the pocket, Zimmermann had escaped. They would surrender at 19:30 hours after brief resistance. 450 men marching into Soviet captivity because their commander followed orders instead of survival instincts. Zimmermann's tank rolled to a stop behind German lines. He stood in his commander's hatch, watched the rest of his column arrive, counted tanks, counted personnel. 3 tanks lost, Tank 7, 23 with destroyed track. Tank 7, 41. Burned. Tank 6, 98. Hit by artillery during the final run through the corridor. 15 crewmen, on foot. All alive. 23 soldiers killed during the retreat. 47 wounded. 706 alive who should have been encircled. Versus Major Wolf's force. 450 encircled. Future prisoners. The math had worked. But Zimmermann's unauthorized smokescreen retreat had saved 706 lives. And now he was about to face the consequences. Oberst Heinrich Strauss, division commander, was waiting at the defensive line. 49 years old, professional soldier, strict disciplinarian. He watched Zimmermann's column arrive with an expression that revealed nothing. Zimmermann climbed out of his tank. His uniform was soaked with sweat. His hands were shaking from 12 minutes of tension. His crew emerged behind him. Koch, Schmidt, Weber, Kraus, all exhausted. Strauss walked forward, stopped 3 meters from Zimmermann. Hauptmann Klaus Zimmermann, Strauss said, his voice formal and cold. You are under arrest for unauthorized tactical action, violation of communications protocol, depletion of defensive smoke, stores without authorization, and willful disobedience of direct orders from a superior officer. Feldwebel Koch stepped forward. Sir, Hauptmann Zimmermann saved 700 lives. I'm aware of the outcome, Feldwebel. That doesn't change the violations. Strauss gestured to 2 military police. Take him into custody. He'll face court-martial within 48 hours. The MPs approached. Zimmermann unbuckled his sidearm, handed it over. Standard procedure for arrest. Behind him, 39 tanks formed up in silent rows. Engines ticking as they cooled. Crews standing by their machines. 706 soldiers watching their commander being arrested for saving their lives. Nobody spoke. But the message was clear. Zimmermann had violated every regulation, but he'd brought them home alive. And now the Wehrmacht would decide whether survival mattered more than discipline. At 16:42 hours, military police escorted Hauptmann Klaus Zimmermann to division headquarters. Behind him, 706 soldiers watched in silence. 39 tanks lined up like monuments to unauthorized survival. Oberst Heinrich Strauss sat behind a field desk. Maps covered the walls. Radio equipment crackled with traffic from the deteriorating front. Zimmermann stood at attention. You understand the charges? Strauss asked. Yes, sir. Unauthorized use of smoke stores. Violation of direct orders. Maximum penalty is execution for disobeying orders in combat zone. Yes, sir. Strauss leaned back. 706 soldiers are alive because of your unauthorized action. 450 are encircled with Wolf. Both outcomes put me in an impossible position. He pulled out a folder. 6 previous unauthorized actions. Every single one violated orders. Every single one succeeded with minimal casualties. You're either the luckiest officer in the Wehrmacht or the most tactically competent. I was a chemistry teacher, sir. I understand gas dispersion. Saved lives today. By violating orders. By understanding something command didn't. Court-martial convened July 12, 1944. 3 officers as judges. The charges were read. Zimmermann pleaded guilty to everything. The prosecution presented evidence. Radio logs. Testimony from Wolf's aide. Documentation proving smoke stores required division authorization. Then Feldwebel Koch testified. Hauptmann Zimmermann's unauthorized decisions are why we survive. 62% survival rate versus 41% regimental average over 4 years. 11 tank commanders testified. Infantry soldiers testified. 706 written statements supporting Zimmermann. Soviet intelligence intercepts proved his theory. Soviet Commander Volkov had reported, enemy smoke screen, coordination impossible. Enemy escaped during confusion. After 3 hours deliberation, Strauss read the verdict. Guilty of all charges. However, your actions preserved 706 soldiers who would otherwise have been lost. Your chemistry knowledge provided tactical advantage not covered in doctrine. Sentence. Formal reprimand. Reduction to Oberleutnant. Reassignment to Panzer Training School. Wunsdorf. You will teach these methods to new officers. Zimmermann had expected execution. Got demotion and teaching assignment instead. Between July and December 1944, Zimmermann trained 300 Panzer officers. Taught chemistry, gas dispersion, smoke tactics. 8 subsequent engagements used his methods. Estimated 2,200 additional personnel escaped encirclements. September 1944. Revised Wehrmacht doctrine authorized smoke deployment for retreat under encirclement conditions. The change came directly from analyzing Zimmermann's results. War ended May 1945. Zimmermann returned to Hamburg, found his city destroyed by bombing, returned to teaching chemistry in 1947. Taught for 32 more years. Students who knew his background asked about the war. Did you fight, Herr Zimmermann? I saved people. How? Chemistry. I understood how gases behave. Annual reunions began in the 1950s. Koch, Becker, Weber, Schmidt, the crews who'd navigated 12 minutes blind through smoke. Koch always proposed the same toast. To Hauptmann Zimmermann. who understood that chemistry beats doctrine. By the 1960s, NATO training manuals referenced Zimmermann-type smoke deployments. American, British, French armored units adopted his tactics. Klaus Zimmermann died October 19, 1983. Age 73. Taught chemistry for 38 years total. Feldwebel Koch gave the eulogy. Klaus Zimmermann saved 706 lives by understanding something professional soldiers didn't. He knew chemistry. And he had courage to trust his calculations over orders that would kill everyone. We're here today. Our children are here. Our grandchildren are here, because one chemistry teacher refused to let regulations kill them. A plaque was installed at Gymnasium Hamburg Nord. Klaus Zimmermann, 1910 to 1983. Chemistry teacher, Wehrmacht officer, saved 706 lives through knowledge and courage. The smokescreen lasted 12 minutes. The court-martial lasted 2 days. The doctrine changes lasted decades. But the lives saved lasted lifetimes. 706 men went home to families, had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Thousands exist because one chemistry teacher understood gas dispersion and had courage to violate 3 regulations. Final count: 23 killed, 47 wounded, 706 escaped. Versus standard retreat estimate: 864 casualties. Zimmermann's unauthorized smokescreen saved approximately 741 lives compared to following orders. Sometimes survival requires unauthorized action. Sometimes, chemistry matters more than doctrine. Sometimes a teacher understands warfare better than generals. Klaus Zimmermann proved it with mathematics and 12 minutes of smoke that blinded an enemy army.